A lot of people jump to labeling their boss as toxic or their team or their workplace as toxic without taking a moment to think about, I'm waiting for everyone else to change, without ever communicating that if I try and tell them they're wrong, they're likely to just how much of that is based on behaviors or things you've seen from that boss versus how much of it is, if you can speak their truth out of your mouth, it's going to lead. If I'm going to help people achieve amazing things together, the first place to start is with some.
On today's insightful episode of the Chris Senise Podcast, I'm thrilled to welcome organizational psychologist and Berkman Review specialist, Dr. Liane Davey, aka the Team Doctor, known for her ability to turn dysfunctional groups into cohesive, thriving powerhouses. She's also a keynote speaker and the brilliant mind behind best-selling books, The Good Fight and You First. She spent decades advising top organizations with powerful tools that improve collaboration and communication even in the most challenging environments. Take a listen. I'm going to preface this interview a bit because I read your book, You First, a long time ago, so I was already a fan. But when I began researching a guest who specialized with the Berkman Review, there you were.
Here I am. Well, I first took it in 1998, so that's a long time.
And I don't remember knowing that about you and using the Berkman, but for me personally, I'm a believer, not an expert, but and just the awareness it brings. And awareness is something you talk about considerably, like with toxic environments and leadership and even self-awareness. And at least for me, a lot of that awareness was not just how my usual behavior was. I think that's the easy part, but also my needs and behaviors under stress. And I did mine back in 2014, and it's been a great tool for me in a lot of ways. Can you explain why the interest in this specialization?
So my purpose on the planet, as I've sort of crafted it, is to help people achieve amazing things together. And I've found no better tool for helping individuals and teams understand themselves and one another more than the Berkman. So if I'm going to help people achieve amazing things together, the first place to start is with some self-awareness, with some understanding and insight about how different people are wired differently. And it's been an amazing tool for 27 years.
Frankly, I refer back to my Berkman frequently because I'll start to recognize certain behaviors or even think about my perspectives, and I'll go back and be like, oh yeah, that's totally in my Berkman. I say though that one of the things that really struck me and had me convinced was how I feel it nailed it with my interests, because being in the finance world and a musician, I was 97 musical and 97
Numerical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes total sense. So this is a win-win because, again, I'm a fan of yours and the Berkman that you happen to be an expert in. But in either event, let's talk about you and what you've been up to.
What have I been up to? A little bit of a lot of things. So my work is a little bit of a portfolio. So the major component of that portfolio is working with CEOs and their executive teams to help them achieve amazing things together. So facilitating business strategy, working on executive team dynamics, that sort of thing. And that's very fun. I'm working with 3 very different companies at the moment and getting a lot of joy out of that challenge. The second piece of my little portfolio life is writing, speaking, being a content creator. So I have a YouTube channel. I write a blog every week for the last, I think this is 13 years. I'm in the midst of writing a new book. And then all of that gets workshopped out as a keynote speaker all over everywhere. That's the second piece. And I guess the third piece is taking that intellectual property and those ideas and packaging them up so that other coaches and consulting firms can use these ideas and tools and resources in their own practices. So licensing that out. So those are the 3 pieces of our business. And it makes for a very balanced and rewarding. One of the things we're talking about Berkman, my Berkman, my needs are near the center. And what I find is that I need a fair amount of variety. I need environments that provide the time for the ideation and dreaming and writing and time inside my head. I need time out with people, with teams, sharing and getting excited about ideas. I need a little bit of building systems and that sort of thing. And so it really works for me to be an entrepreneur because I get a little bit of each of those pieces in my life, which scratches all the itches.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I like how you highlight that you need variety to stay engaged. I'm the same exact way. And, unlocking potential is one of the focuses on this podcast. And so experts like you can help us understand that a little better. I want to jump right into toxicity, even in having your own business, because you're still working with others and essentially always a team. So, employees, contractors, clients, and understanding what role you play and the dynamic you bring to any group is underrated, regardless of whether you're a business owner, business leader, or somewhere else in the organization. Everybody plays a role. And your books and keynote speeches on toxicity talk about the role each of us plays in those environments. Because reality is it really toxic, or how much of it is actually you? I hear the word toxic so much, and I've been a believer understanding that the role you play in every sort of relationship, or even like, and that's the case in everything, work relationships, family, friend groups, that's what I call it, friend groups. So understanding how you are involved is important, but it takes me to a place where if you're struggling at work with someone, specifically a boss or manager, there's more of a tendency to not rock the boat, sort of to shut down and not talk about, what brings you to the difficult conversation and avoid toxicity, having difficult conversations, which can be incredibly stressful. Take me to your grocery store example, because, it can be seemingly difficult to be up against the boss. But you think those are conversations we need to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people kind of jump to labeling their boss as toxic or their team or their workplace as toxic without taking a moment to think about, how am I contributing to this dynamic? Have I done anything to help my boss understand the impact that they're having? Have I advocated for myself effectively? And, often the answer to that is no. I'm waiting for everyone else to change without ever communicating that I have an expectation they're not meeting, or I have a boundary they're
Hmm.
crossing. So, yeah, I think that's a
Sure.
really upsetting and frustrating part of it's probably an upsetting and frustrating part of our entire world. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people willing to sort of sit in grievance about how the world is doing them wrong, and not as many people willing to take a risk, do something
Right.
to try and change that.
I'll give you a quick example of where in my career I've challenged people to do that. It's actually been in the recruiting process where I've been interviewing people. You ask them, why are you looking to leave, where you're at, and depending on some of the answers I've gotten, I've actually challenged the candidate to say, have you talked to your boss about that, if that's the case? Because this thing you think exists, have you actually talked to them and at least given them the opportunity? And correct me if I'm wrong, the reason I do that is because that could potentially be something they'll have in most places if they don't address those perceptions of the world, the external world of what is happening to them. And I could see a career of having that challenge. And sometimes I think even in the recruiting process, I could be helpful by saying something like that to get them to at least
Yeah, oh,
consider it if they
absolutely.
haven't. So, what's your take on
Absolutely.
that?
So I think about it. So the work of Barbara Coloroso, who's a childhood
Hmm.
expert, she does work on bullying, and she talks about how bullying is a three-person dynamic. It's not just the person who's bullying, and it's not just the person being bullied. There often needs to be a third party to it to give it the kind of
Uh huh.
social motivation. So I borrowed from her, was inspired by her to talk about team dynamics where we have people behaving wickedly, people who are wounded, and people
Right.
who are witnessing the whole thing. And so I encourage people to be candid, honest, transparent with themselves about, where is your behavior? Are you
Right.
behaving wickedly? So, somebody who might be gossiping about somebody else on the team, or putting somebody else's work low priority on their list and not delivering for them, or whatever it is. So people behave wickedly. Um, many people, the one we're talking about right now, play the victim in the situation and feel as though, well, there's nothing I could do. It's everyone else's fault. And then the third situation, of course, is all the people are like, well, none of my business, not my problem, not my circus, not my monkeys. And they behave as though the dysfunction on their team has nothing to do with them. But just by witnessing and enabling and allowing that either wicked or wounded behavior to go on, they're facilitating it. So it's really important when you're having that conversation with the person, even in the recruiting process, you're opening their eyes to something that's going to affect them for their whole lives. And it's a really important chance to say, am I willing to take ownership of my behavior, whether it's wicked, wounded, or witness, and say, I have much more agency to change my team dynamic or to change a toxic dynamic than I like to think. I think that does people a great service. And I think we need more folks willing to say, what do you own in this? And
Right.
what's your opportunity to change the dynamic if it's not working for you?
Right. And it's really not a question they need to answer for me. It's more for them. And I think it's important when you're in the workplace to be able to recognize your part or any relationship. I remember sidetracking to a different book, Patrick Lynch, tongue twister, yeah, with the five dysfunctions of a team. I mean, I can appreciate how it was written. It's sort of a little fable. I think it's a fable. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
a fable.
fable. Yeah.
And that book really spoke to me because it helped me see in a story those team dysfunctions again exist in everything, and you play a different role in those different groups of your life. And it's like how you lay things out in your YouTube videos, you break it down so simply. I've caught myself watching them being like, yep, right on, she's right. That's exactly how it plays out. But still, despite how easily the conversation with the boss can be broken down, I'm still going to venture to say that most of the time, people are going to say, yeah, but in that specific case, that's not how my boss is. And it would work for everyone else, but not me. And those are their real perceptions. What's your response to that?
Yeah, so I think I'd ask a question, what gives you that impression? What have you seen that is making you fear taking that choice? What would work? If that wouldn't work, what do you think would make a difference? Who else could
Yeah.
you call on to? Who else has influence with your boss that you might be able to talk to? So it's really about not invalidating how that person feels. If they're feeling afraid, if they're feeling like that's a brick wall they've run into, it's not my place to tell them they're wrong. If I try and tell them they're wrong, they're
Mhm.
likely to just go talk to somebody else and probably complain about me. It certainly is going to erode trust in the relationship. So if instead I meet them with
Right.
curiosity, I validate that I hear how they're feeling, and
Mhm.
it is a perfectly legitimate way to feel, but instead help them understand, where's that coming from? How much of that is based on behaviors or things you've seen from that boss versus how much of it is, um, you know, pictures, stories you've envisioned in your head about how this might play out, but that is really your very creative imagination at play, as opposed
Right.
to,
That's a good way of looking
and
at
then,
it.
trying to find things that you can control. I often use the line, my first approach is to try and make a dent in the problem. And if I can't make a dent in the problem, I try and reduce the dent it makes in me. So if I was talking to that person, the first line of questioning would be to help them try and imagine and find some way through to their boss,
Hmm.
whether directly or indirectly, a different way of talking about it, a different person to help them influence, whatever, make a dent in the problem. And if I then became convinced that they had tried the things that were reasonable to make a dent in the problem and they weren't working, then I would switch to helping the person with strategies to reduce the dent it's making in them, to manage the stress more effectively, to bolster the support they receive so that they can hang in there, at least until they have maybe an option to make a different choice for work. So, invalidating somebody who's telling you it's too scary, that's just going to shut things down. But making it clear that you empathize with the fact that it feels hard, it feels risky, and then helping them find their way somehow through a little crack of light through it, I think is a much kinder thing to do. A lot of people in the moment want to kind of take the nice path, which is, oh yeah, you're so right. Like that boss is so unreasonable. Um, and that might feel like the nice thing to say in the moment, but the kind thing to do is to try and help them think differently about it, find some optionality that they didn't know was there, those sorts of things. That's the longer term, kinder approach.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm a virtual assistant coach, and I'm also the founder of The Digital Her. And I help women gain the confidence and the skills to leave their 9 to 5 and start profitable virtual assistant businesses. If you're stuck in a job that drains you and you're wondering how other women are building freedom-based online businesses, I'm here to show you that it's possible and that you're not too late. Created a free virtual assistant blueprint just for you to help you take the first steps. Just a simple guide to get your business off the ground and help you start making money online. The link to the download is in the show notes below, so go grab it and let's build something that actually works for you.
I'd agree with that. My own experience in those situations as a leader has been that when I'm speaking to someone who is coming to me, specifically trying to have that kind of conversation, I do yield a little bit of caution because I recognize that it takes a lot of courage to do, as you mentioned. It's almost admirable when someone does it. But as a boss, leader, so many names, don't always agree, but whatever it would be, you can have a very lasting effect on people if you do not handle those conversations well, because they've mustered up all this courage and you're going to shoot them down. You're potentially affecting how they perform for the rest of their career, depending, on who the person is, because you don't know how long they've been considering the conversation for. And you'll come across some people that are fine having those conversations and just try to resolve conflict, and some are better than others. But most people I find struggle with challenging anyone, let alone their boss. And as a leader, you really have a responsibility in being very careful in how you handle those types of conversations and the words you use. If you were giving advice to other leaders that had to have these conversations, which is probably all of them, what would you say is the number one thing to start this? Like, hands down, aside from all the things you talk about, what is the very first response when someone comes to you looking to address something that as a boss or leader you should be doing?
I think the number one line for me is that you want to find a way to speak their truth out of your mouth before you speak your own.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I boil it all down to. So when the person is coming to you, what you're going to want to do is contradict them, tell them why they're so wrong, give them a whole bunch of facts, tell them that the other person did it no problem, or we did it fine last time, or you're going to try and shut down something that goes contrary to you barreling ahead in the direction that you need to go. So fight that urge and instead switch to, how do I ask some really good questions to understand what is this about for this person? What has triggered them? So I was talking with a gentleman last week who said, often these kinds of conflicts between him and his direct reports come when there's anything that would increase their workload. And he said, I think the reason that they're like getting frustrated is that I've done something that increases their workload. And I was like, well, but there's a lot more to it than that, probably. Like, what might be behind it? And so as we talked, we came up with different scenarios. Like, some people, when you're bringing something new to them, it's not that they're going to have to work more hours or things like that they're afraid of, or work hard, but the new workload is something they're not familiar with. They're not sure that they'll be good at it. Their self-confidence is questioned. Their capability is questioned, and they're worried that, this is going to show off that I can't do this. I'm not good at this. And that's a very different thing from somebody else who's like, I've already said yes to a few too many things in the company, kind of outside my job. I'm doing a couple extra committees, and now this extra workload is going to really mean that I'm in trouble. I'm going to have to say no to something that I don't want to have to say no to. Well, these are very different reasons why somebody might be resisting. So as the leader, starting with questions to understand, what is this about for this person? And listening, because they're not always going to tell you directly and clearly. So listening past the emotional reaction down into, What do they value? What do they believe? What feels threatened for them here? And if you can get to articulating that, it sounds like for you, this is about um, you've spread yourself a bit thin. And if you take this on, it's going to mean saying no to some people you don't want to say no to. Is that a fair take? If you can speak their truth out of your mouth, it's going to lead to a constructive conversation, to problem solving. The trust in your relationship is going to go up versus what most of us want to do, which is just like, well, I need you to do this. So I don't care what else you've got going on. Like, this needs to get done. Talk to the hand, right? So really, really important.
Nice. That's really great advice and insight. I know you've mentioned this in videos, books, and everything just because, I've studied you before you came on, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on nervous bosses, the kinds of bosses that someone's working under and they are so nervous that an employee gets the sense that they're picking up slack for them because they're so busy being nervous. I mean, I've seen that happen, and it keeps them from seeing, my dad always says what's standing right in front of you, literally on your nose. And I remember back in the day having had a nervous boss in the past, and that was a challenge because the team dynamic revolved around constant uncertainty and overkill with work. And I learned that was the kind of boss I didn't want to be, but you got to do something while you're planning on leaving your boss. So as a coach, what do you say to someone experiencing this?
Yeah, so you have to be very attuned to what seems like risk to them. Right? So your spidey sense about risk needs to go up, and you need to become essentially an effective risk manager. So understanding, okay, what could happen here? So I'd be talking with my nervous boss a lot about, okay, what would good look like in this situation? What outcome are we looking for? Then, of course, giving them a place to articulate, what are the things that you worry could go wrong in this situation? What risks do we have to mitigate? What would be a bad outcome in this situation? And then asking questions to say, who else might we call on to reduce that risk? What else might we take off our plate so that we can focus on this and ensure we can deliver? You become essentially a risk manager for your boss. Yep. And it's just part of a much broader category of managing up. And sometimes when you have a boss who has some kind of gap like that, you have to manage up. And what managing up really is reversing the direction of management. So in some ways, you are managing your boss to make sure they give you what you need to do your job. And in this case, giving you a line of sight to forward motion when probably everything in them is wanting to just like, do nothing and hedge. And when, of course, those responses, hedging, procrastinating, diluting to try and like cover all bases, all of those things actually increase the risk, make them more vulnerable. So you're trying to plot a path that makes them feel like there's risk everywhere, including, I love Roger Martin's work on the risk of the status quo. There's also risk in doing nothing, and helping them see that, and helping them see you've chosen the best path to get to the outcomes that matter to them. You've considered the risks. You've got plans and ways of mitigating those risks, and you're going to move forward. So, yep, you have to manage up in that situation, and that's just part of dealing with that nervous boss. May be wonderful on many, many other dimensions.
Sure.
Good. Enjoy all the other things that they bring to you, but know that you're probably going to have to manage up on some part of that relationship.
And I think that's helpful to share because ultimately, the further along you get in your career, hopefully you're being exposed to many different types of personalities and working styles. If it's your peers, your other leaders, your direct reports, or your boss. And I think that's really valuable information for you to be sharing for just about anybody. Let's switch into the CEO role real quickly. Is there a typical challenge CEOs are coming to you for to help them resolve in their organizations? like a consistent thing that kind of sticks out when they're coming to you for, leadership training and development and helping them organize their business?
I guess the most common thing that I'm
Oh.
working on is conflict. And it's
Mm.
probably less what you think. It's that most CEOs are not getting enough
Mm.
healthy conflict from their teams. There's insufficient conflict. So mostly I'm helping them create forums, create psychological safety, facilitate in a way that
Yeah.
allows their team to have much, much, much more conflict. Um, and that's the healthy form of conflict, which I talk about as tension, productive tension with one another. Most executive teams have insufficient tension, um, and
Sure.
they have entirely too much friction. And so
Uh,
that's the most common thing that I'm helping CEOs with is, okay, how do we get the right amount of healthy tension? How do we get almost no unhealthy, destructive
mhm.
friction?
Mhm.
There are a variety of things that go with that. How do we build trust? Because trust is essential to both having more productive tension, but also, giving people the benefit of the doubt, getting
Mhm.
away from the interpretations and
Mhm.
negativity bias that tends to create friction. So trust is really important. Alignment is another piece of that puzzle, and decisiveness. But kind of under the big wrapper. I think it's why I wrote my second book, The Good Fight, because
Mhm.
when I wrote You First, which was a more general team effectiveness book, there was one chapter on productive conflict. And what I noticed is that was the one everybody wanted to talk about. Everybody wanted to come back to that chapter. Everybody's like, we need help with this part. And so that's why, in some ways, The Good Fight is a bit of a sequel, but it's kind of the deep, deep origin story of productive conflict. And so that's really the most common thing that CEOs need support with.
Do you think that that's something that, do you think conflict is something that's generally avoided for the most part?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and what would it be? I know that there would be a number of reasons, but why are people avoiding conflict?
Yeah, so it goes back to,
Oh.
how humans have evolved. So we've evolved for thousands and thousands of years to go along to get along with anybody that's considered part of our in-group. So starts there. We're socialized to believe that conflict is unproductive, unprofessional, unladylike, all those sorts of things. So even from childhood, we're taught that we're supposed to go along to get along. So there's a lot of that. There is, people are nice, which, nice is a bit of a nasty word for me. So nice means a little bit superficial, a little bit invested in my own comfort as opposed to the, quality of the situation. So we're a little bit too nice.
Mhm.
We're chicken a lot of the time. Like, if I say something and then you have a great comeback, or I'm wrong, or you stop liking me, or, all of those sorts of things. We know that humans experience social pain. So the way we respond if we get a signal that we are disagreeing with the group is akin to exactly the same brain functioning as if we hit our hand with a hammer. So it's painful for us to feel in discord with the group. So there are, reasons all the way from our pure biology up to the way we're socialized, the narratives, the stories, the cheesy company values of like teamwork that aren't well articulated. We never learn what we mean by that. And so people think, well, we have to be harmonious because we're all in the same boat and we shouldn't rock the boat and we all have to pull in the same direction. And so there's myriad reasons why we avoid conflict, but most of them are because it's uncomfortable and it's risky. And we're just not, a lot of us these days, especially, the way things are at work right now, we just don't have the energy to put ourselves out there like that.
Yeah, I've experienced those environments where it's rah rah rah, yet nobody believes in cultures that are superficial or, phony. They still try to keep the peace and participate in things even if they don't believe in them. So, yeah, and I love how you say values because in some organizations it can be so phony and not everybody buys into it. And I think buy in is really important. And you can put words on a sheet of paper or wrap them on a wall, but how important do you think buy in is?
Of course it is. Yeah, absolutely. Because most of us walk around the world with very low self-awareness.
Mhm.
And so it takes a lot of effort to hold up enough mirrors to start getting people to recognize, oh, okay, like I
Yeah.
play a part in this and this
Right.
isn't what we need it to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm hoping to achieve also with the podcast is to help viewers and listeners recognize the right sort of environments for themselves, but then also understand what's making up their own psyche. I bring that up because I wonder how deep do you go? So if we're talking about an executive team of 5, you mentioned earlier also about 3 people involved in bullying. If a CEO comes to you and says, I can't get it figured out, nobody here is working together and it's affecting the business, how deep do you go into the psyche of those people and understanding each of those 5 individuals, and how do you go about it? I know the Bergman felt a little weird for me in the beginning, but it's forced me to look in the mirror a lot.
Yeah, so I go pretty far into understanding
Mm-hmm.
each of the individuals for sure. It's why we use the Berkman assessment. It gets to some pretty intimate stuff. What we don't do is anything that goes into the
Right,
world of pathology.
right.
So we aren't clinical psychologists. So my background is organizational psychology. So if there's pathology, if there's, if there's mental illness, if there's that sort of thing, we tend to refer people to someone who can help them with that. But yeah, you get pretty deep and people are quite candid with you about, how they're experiencing things, what their struggles are, and that's the only
Mm.
way you really untangle some of what's going on in most teams. It's why we only work with 3 teams at a time. It's very intensive work, um, because you are getting to know every single individual on a team. And unfortunately, teams are not 5 people. Teams would be easier if they were 5 people. A lot of times these days they're 15 people. And that's too many relationships to have an effective team. So it's really important to start to, kind of get teams down to a size
Mm-hmm.
where we can get to a very high level of trust, and be decisive and move quickly. But our teams are getting very bloated as our organization structures are getting very complex. And I think that makes it all the harder because we don't have that strong, trusting dynamic. So we're always kind of hedging and we're not completely candid because we don't know if it's safe to be completely candid. So, yeah, that's a big part of the dynamic.
Yeah, I can see the challenge with that, but then there's just so much to be gained from it at the same time. It must be rough. I want to switch gears again here real quickly. You first was first,
You first was first.
and then we had the good fight, and
The good fight.
then anything in the works now.
There's a new one coming. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a new one coming. It doesn't have a name yet.
Okay.
Um, The new one is about, basically the concept is that it's not our workload creating burnout. It's our thought load.
Mm-hmm.
And thought load, I coined the term and define it as a bit of an equation, like a ratio. So on the top, our cognitive load from how much we're expected to pay attention to and how distracted we are and how much is coming at us, plus the emotional burden of how emotionally dysregulated society is, how much emotional contagion is coming into the workplace right now, how everything seems to lead to drama. That's on the top of the thought load equation. But the load part is that all of that is loaded onto, on the bottom, depleted energy reserves. And we're not sleeping, we're exhausted, we're burned out. And so and unfortunately, the way our bodies and brains work is each one of those problems. So, how distracted we are, how triggered we are, and how burned out we are, each exacerbates the other. So, for example, as we become tired, one of the first things to go is our brain's ability to calibrate what to pay attention to and what not to. So the attention problem and the cognitive load gets worse and worse and worse. As we become exhausted, We are also less able to kind of process our emotions rationally, and things become more dramatic and whatever. As our anxiety goes up, we try and multitask to bring our anxiety down. And the number one outcome of multitasking is increased anxiety. So thought load is this, you know, really terrible death spiral of what's happening to us in the modern workplace. So that the new book is about how do managers cope with their own thought load and then help to bring down the thought load of their teams.
Wow, that's amazing. Did the idea for this next book come from anything to do with the good fight? Sort of, you had the evolution of the good fight from you first, or?
Less so. This is more really just
Mhm,
watching where people are at right now.
mhm,
So, a lot of the team dynamics issues that I'm exposed to in working with teams, a lot of it comes back to people, their thought load is so high, they cannot achieve amazing things together because they're letting each other down. They're taking on too much. They're burning out. They're completely diluted. So they're just like not bringing the best of themselves. They are emotionally triggered. So this new book came from working really in the depths with real teams, seeing that it is nearly impossible these days. Just, I'll give you a few things, a few stats to give you a sense. So the average manager is in 22 hours of meetings a week and does 11 hours of email. So that's 33 hours of your week gone. The average employee, for example, can only go 11 minutes without an interruption and then returns to their original task 25 minutes later, which means even their interruption got interrupted. The average employee has to toggle between 1,200 different screens a day, which means about 4 hours a week you're doing nothing but just toggling
mhm.
between things. It's so extreme right now. 65% of people report having, emotional episodes at work on a regular basis. We know that men have more emotional outbursts at work than women. But those are just things that we hadn't been thinking of emotionality because it's frustration or impatience or anger.
Right.
It's just everywhere. Burnout is on the rise. So, it's a very, very, very acute problem at the moment, and one that I haven't seen other people trying to address holistically. So there's great books about how to be focused.
Right.
There's great books about emotion. There's great books about resilience. But you cannot solve any one of these without solving all three of them. Thought load really does kind of come as a package, and we have to solve it as a package. So, yeah, that's what I'm working on now. Super fun.
That's pretty incredible work. Looking into the data, I can see that even for me to understand how this is working out,
Lots
because
of data,
I
yeah.
mean, even in my own world, it's a matter of email. Someone's texting me, someone's calling me, I'm getting a message on Teams, or, I have to be in a meeting and now there's filming. And, on that note, I've made it a habit of just scheduling 10-minute meetings because that's all I can give. And, the 10-minute meeting, just because I just can't be everywhere all the time. And that's been effective in me reducing some of the time I spend in meetings, because I mean, I guess I could be very direct in meetings when I say, okay, what's this meeting about? Don't need to know about the weather in your city. Let's get to it. Because if I have to do that 10 times in a day and we spend 5 minutes per meeting on pleasantries, well, that's almost an hour out of my day and I want to get home to my family. So I could burn the midnight oil, but I'm happy to avoid that.
Oh, I want to. Well, burning the midnight oil is what's causing huge problems, right?
Yeah, agreed, agreed. I'm very excited about your next book. I'm excited for you. You're doing wonderful work. I think it's so necessary. And
I think on this thought load one, I think I would love for people to just play with that idea and say, if you were to ruthlessly try to lower your thought load so that you can do your best work, really make a contribution,
Mhm.
how would you, even without reading the book, even with just me putting out that provocation, that thought load is the problem? And what would you do if you knew that the most important thing you need to fix is your thought load? How would your week look different? give it a try. Give it a try. And then, make sure you pre-order the book when it comes out.
Pre-order.
I'll give you my version of the answers. But I think even with that provocation, you'll be able to think of things you can do to reduce your thought load.
That's a great way to put it. I'd say that's very important and excellent advice for anyone who is watching or listening to this right now.
Connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me what that inspired for you. Shoot me a message and tell me, how did you think differently when you heard this term of thought load and when you played with the idea that reducing your distraction, reducing and processing your emotions so you're less triggered, and really tapping into renewable sources of energy. What did that conjure for you? What have you tried? How did it work? Yeah, let me know.
I'm looking forward to that. So thought load is the word of the day. And, where else can we find out more about your work?
I think that's it. They can find Dr. Liane Davey on YouTube, lianedavey.com, and and then connect with me on LinkedIn.
But thank you so much for coming on the pilot season of the Chris Senise Podcast. We'll have to have another episode after your book is released, or even if you've got more information that you're finding and statistics that would be great to put in front of people. Again, the timing is excellent for this book, so I wish you much, much luck with that.
My pleasure.